Good morning and welcome to this webinar and live webcast. It's brought to you by FNB and Moneyweb. My name is Niekerk and I'm the editor of Moneyweb. We're going to talk about alternative energy solutions for the agriculture sector today. Now, the agriculture sector is a very, very important sector in the South African economy, and it is arguably one of the hardest hit sectors due to the unreliable supply of electricity from Eskom, as well as the double-digit increases we have seen in recent years. And it's really a challenge for many farmers. And these alternative energy solutions do provide a very viable, financially viable solution and option for many farmers. And farmers will also contribute to the green economy, and I believe most farmers would really like to see a much greener world around us. I have three guests to assist me. Next to me is Durham. He's head of alternative energy solutions at FNB Commercial Banking. And there's always a CA involved, especially when it comes to financing. He is a CA and he has significant experience in many sectors, and his speciality currently is alternative energy solutions. Good morning, Carl.
Thank you.
Okay. Then Jaco Botha. He is the CEO of Solareff. He's a professional electrical engineer. He co-founded Solareff in 2010, and Solareff is a specialist supplier of renewable energy solutions focusing on medium and large-scale solar projects. Welcome.
Thank you, Ray. Good morning.
And Dawie Maree. He is head of agriculture information and marketing at FNB Commercial. And Dawie has a very strong agricultural background. He was an agricultural economist at the Milk Producers Organization, and he also represents FNB on various industry platforms such as AgBiz, the Agricultural Business Chamber. Dawie, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with just setting the scene of how the electricity problems in South Africa are affecting farmers, because it is a big problem, but at the same time the agriculture sector is actually performing really well at the moment. So can you maybe just give us a background of how the sector is performing and the impact the electricity problems has on it?
Right, thank you. I think you've mentioned in your intro, the importance of electricity in agriculture. Although we are a small industry in terms of our direct contribution to the economy, around 2.5% direct contribution to GDP, the manufacturing side and the supply chain side of it increased that percentage to anything between 15 and 20%. So a very important one in terms of agro-processing as well. Obviously, electricity, very important in our intensive industries, irrigation, for example, our dairy, pork and poultry production as well. So irrigation plays a big part in terms of food production, so crucial from that perspective as well. We deal with perishable products, so from the agro-processing side, we need to uphold the cold chain in terms of food safety and all those related matters. So electricity, obviously crucial from that perspective as well. You've mentioned how agriculture performed over the last 2 years. Yes, we had 2 magnificent years in terms of production. Climate played a role. We had good rainfall. In certain areas, there is still droughts. The parts of the Northern Cape, the Eastern Cape and so on. So a bit of concern there. But in general, we had good production conditions. The problem now is farmers want to expand. They want to make use of these good conditions, but there is one limiting factor. They can't get electricity supply to do those expansions. So from that perspective, one of the challenges that we have is the availability of electricity.
Yeah, I think the availability is crucial. I spoke to a farmer in the Western Cape recently. He has a big fruit business, and he says the unreliable electricity supply cost him a lot more money than actually the tariffs thereof, and he's really anxious to try and get a more reliable supply. What is the impact, Jaco, on the unreliability? Is that the biggest issue currently for farmers?
Look, it goes 2 ways. Obviously, the cost of electricity, as you mentioned, the actual tariffs but it all depends on what specific is done in the farming. As Dawie mentioned, if it's in dairy, you absolutely have to keep the processes going. You need to keep your refrigeration going. So it's a different solutions for different clients. So some clients, the top priority, almost the top two priorities, I want to say, would be the reliability of it. So in those instances, you would look at putting in a storage solution for a client. So that would be first priority and typically would be done in a first phase.
Storage, you mean batteries?
Batteries, exactly, yes. But then you've got other clients that said, you know, reliability of the power supply is not as big an issue. We've got a diesel generator, so that kind of covers us for instances of load shedding. But I actually want to save power. I want to save money by saving power. So for those clients, top priority then would be to install a system that generates power that in essence reduces your consumption from Eskom or whatever your grid connection supply is.
Carl, can a farmer save money by using an alternative energy solution?
Definitely. So we've seen numerous case studies where really a farmer benefits by just installing a simple solar plant that looks to really just provide energy savings, as Jaco rightly mentioned, and often those can be paid off exceptionally quickly. You've got payback periods in the region of 4 to 5 years for those solutions, and the benefit is 30 to 50% reduction in your energy cost or your energy bill as an operation. So that's significant relief from ongoing energy cost increases that the farming sector or the entire business sector in South Africa is seeing.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about the financing in just a minute, but Jaco, let's talk about the solution. So let's use an example. There's a farmer, say a dairy farmer who uses a lot of electricity. How should that farmer approach a solution, and what should he or she consider?
Right. Well, first of all, and then it's crucial as a first step to properly assess the actual requirement, to understand what is required from a system. Quite often, and unfortunately we've seen that, I suppose with any developing industry, often wrong solutions get applied. So it's important to understand the need first step. That's absolutely important. So understand the consumption of the farm, understand what he wants to achieve. Does he want to just save money? Does he want to have a backup? And then once one starts looking at storage solutions, there's a further opportunity that comes with it in the form of what we call energy arbitrage, demand saving. I can maybe unpack that a little bit more as we go, but it's additional savings that actually come with storage. Now, a farmer that's looking to do solar would...
You talk about storage, is that you store storage power from Eskom? You don't generate it from solar panels. Is that one option?
Yes. Well, let's say that the rudimentary option as storing power, as traditionally referred to as backup, where you could potentially store power from Eskom, and that would be a backup. And often that's not really, from a financial viability point of view, a solution. But a lot of guys do look at it, and typically in a form of a UPS, but it's typically for a shorter period. Then you start looking at putting in generation capacity, that's the actual solar panel part of it, and then start coupling larger storage systems with that. So the opportunity would then come through for the clients in first of all, saving. So first step is to understand the daytime consumption of a farmer, and what we refer to as grid-tied solar systems. You would match a grid-tied solar system with that daytime consumption. So that's typically a phase one, and 90% of the cases that's a phase one that we would do for a client. Important for clients to then understand is that a relationship with a solar provider, or whether it's this financing, whether it's the technology side of it, it's not a 5-year relationship. You're essentially embarking on a 25-year, 30-year relationship with that solution, and that's something that's going to keep on upgrading and changing as you go. So typically phase one, straightforward grid-tied solar system with no storage, i.e. no batteries. Second phase often is then to start looking at understanding the consumption profile of the facility better, and then start incorporating storage to then actually increase your consumption to a broader time of the day. So it's not only there when the sun shines, and you start looking at generating power for early morning and late afternoons, and then even at night. Now often we do find people that come to us and say, listen, I'm tired of this and I can't take it anymore, I just want to go off grid. And the first thing we would advise is, don't really necessarily just look off the cuff at that. From a financial point of view, that's not going to be your optimal solution.
So most of those solutions are bespoke for a specific farmer.
Absolutely.
It's not a one-size-fits-all and you just tweak it here and there.
We've quite honestly, we haven't seen a single system that's copy and paste. It's absolutely bespoke solutions.
Right. Sorry, but I think what Jaco said, what's important is, don't make short-term decisions, because you must take your long-term planning also in consideration, especially in terms of your production planning. Where will you be over 5 years and 10 years? Because that will have an effect on the investment that you have to make in terms of alternative energy.
Yeah. You are in the industry. What is the perceptions amongst producers and farmers regarding these alternative energy solutions? Are they educated? Do they know what it's all about? Or is there still a big education element that needs to happen?
Greg, I think there's still a big education drive that needs to happen. I think people still think alternative energy is expensive, and they're not sure what to do about it. So definitely a big drive, and we do it from our side as well to assist them. But I think they realize there's a need to do that. There's a need from a cost perspective. We spoke about the tariff increases, but there's also a secondary need. And you've mentioned the green economy, carbon footprint that we need to reduce, and we'll touch on that later as well. So definitely the perceptions are changing, and they understand there needs to be investments. We know the problems at Eskom won't go away overnight, so definitely more and more people willing to investigate alternative energy.
You are specializing in solar solutions. Is that typically what farmers would look at, is a solar solution, or is wind an option?
Wind, absolutely an option if you're on the right area. So what I think important to understand is if we're looking at solar, you look at what we call a resource. Now, throughout South Africa, we've got some of the best solar resource in the world. And it actually doesn't matter in what part of the country you are. Not naturally the Northern Cape, that's the best resource. But even if we're coming down into, go to Gauteng, even Western Cape, still compared to worldwide standards, some of the best resources available. If you start looking at other alternatives like wind power, your opportunity or what's considered a good resource, a viable resource, typically would be in the coastal areas. If we're talking Gebergte or we're talking Western Cape, those are areas that's got good wind resources. But to install a wind turbine that's going to be financially viable in the northwest just won't work.
Let's talk about money. There is a perception, and that's my perception, that the capital outlay can be significant, the initial capital outlay, but you absolutely reap the benefits afterward. Can you give us a sense of what a farmer would look at when you start to analyze the viability of such a solution?
Certainly, Rick. So I think what we've seen in our kind of experience is that it really depends. I mean, we've seen really small, almost residential sized projects for farmers that are just looking to move some of their business to back up. Then we started seeing some really large infrastructure type projects, particularly in our citrus regions, with almost mega infrastructure projects that are in the region of 30 to 50 million rand, where farmers are looking to do a phase one of energy cost reduction, then a second phase of really energy storage, and then thirdly combining Eskom points to save on those fixed costs, and starting to implement transmission infrastructure on their properties. So those turn into mega multi-year projects that require significant kind of investment and significant knowledge and project management from a business like that.
And can it be financed?
So definitely, I think so. We wouldn't be here, I think, if it wasn't for that. But Ryk, I think, from a financing perspective, it's something we're exceptionally passionate about as FNB. I mean, across commercial banking, we've seen the real big scaling and uptick of the funding of renewable energy, and the agribusiness and agri sectors is by no means a stranger to that. So we really offer a kind of an end-to-end solution for our customers, and that comes to Dawie, to your point of really education. So that's our first phase, and part of the events that we do like today is to really educate our customers of the possibilities of considering alternative energy in their operations and what it means to the energy costs and to the energy certainty and business continuity going forward. So having that, and the next step is really having that conversation through our bankers and through our specialized teams, and then leading that all the way through to assisting customers with suppliers. So a lot of customers really understand, a farmer understands his pack house expansion, but come to him and talk to him about megawatts and how many solar panels he needs to put up, and suddenly things get a bit hairy. So really being able to play call it an informal advisory role in our customers' investment is an important aspect in this industry. So we often do that and help our customers with supplier accreditation or referral to reputable suppliers. And then, obviously financing is the important one. So being able to finance a solar plant for up to 10 years, being able to incorporate those energy saving benefits that a customer gets, when they install a solar plant is fundamentally important. That for us is the difference between just providing a term loan for funding and really providing solar plant funding. So being able to consider that a solar plant might add 2-3 million rands worth of energy saving to a farmer's business. Bringing that into our credit assessment is fundamentally important, and adding that to potentially the valuation of their property is another avenue. So you're almost ring fencing that investment for them, so that's not affecting their normal day-to-day kind of lending with the bank. So those are some of the ways we look at funding solar plants and renewable energy infrastructure.
So if a farmer wants to pull the trigger, do you speak to the banker first or the supplier of the solution?
So you start with the solution. That is I think the area that the bank comes in afterwards. So really it's about having a strong tender process, and Jaco, you can come in here with some significant experience on what tender processes look like in this sector. But really a strong tender process as a customer is fundamentally important. Having multiple quotations, multiple opinions. Then once you are comfortable with this investment that you're about to make, approach the bank, and we can play that informal advisory role.
I want to invite participants in the webinar to send questions. Just type it into the text box, and those questions will be sent to me, and I will put it to the panel. I want to talk about the green economy. Now, everybody feels good when you have a renewable energy solution. You don't use polluting Eskom electricity, and there is a big feel-good element to it. But there's also a lot of financial benefits, and take us through it, how a farmer should approach such a solution and focus on the green benefits it has.
Right, I think if we look at the environmental sustainable goals, the ESGs, there's definitely a big drive towards that, to make sure that we become carbon neutral and so on. So the agricultural industry is actually unique. We can sequestrate a lot of carbon through various processes, and by switching to alternative energy is but one of them. There's a lot of pressure, obviously from European countries and other parts of the world to move to that green economy. At this stage, touch wood, it's not a requirement yet to make or to have a certain carbon footprint when you export products to the EU. It's only for their internal production, but I suspect it will become a pressure point in future. So we must gear up now to make sure that we comply to those regulations when that's enforced into South Africa. We know a lot of our citrus and soft fruit, deciduous fruit, apples and pears, goes to the EU. So it's a big market for us. We can't lose that market. It's important, and that comes back to our business. As soon as we achieve those goals, we might even receive premiums on our products from the retailers from that side as well. So important to make the right decisions now for future production in terms of the ESGs.
Yeah. Now, I think that is a theme not only in the agriculture sector but in many other sectors as well.
Overall,
Yes,
yeah.
definitely. I mean, and to that point, I mean, it's really, you were talking earlier, Dawie, about really having that forward planning. I mean, energy is maybe the issue now, and where the worry sits for a lot of farmers. But they need to, and any business in South Africa really needs to incorporate, the future, and ESG is really part of that in my view.
I think the ESGs will latch onto the fair trade and the traceability issues that we have in agriculture. Well, not issues, but themes that we have in agriculture. And the green economy plays a part in that.
Well, I think perhaps if we're just talking, we mentioned the feel-good part of it and ESGs and pressures from, people that you supply to, but the reality is carbon, the whole carbon runaway and climate change is real. It's not a scientific, thing that's been made up. It is actual, it's real, it's happening. So if we don't act now, and every single one of us, including our farmers, including business, then the planet is not going to be around much longer for many generations.
Yeah, and the agricultural sector will be hardest hit, with no doubt, with climate change. I've got one question here from Corneels. He actually asks several questions. He asked, what is the timeline for getting a grid-tied system in place with regards to the Eskom process, as well as the NERSA processes and regulations? And he also asked, what are the ballpark figures involved with regards to costs?
Okay, so perhaps, and there's probably a little bit more to that, so I'm going to take 2 steps back on that. Just from a NERSA point of view, quite recently there's what we refer to a licensing cap. So there was a 1 megawatt cap that used to be in place, that anything above 1 megawatt you need to register for a license, and that was a very long, very tedious, quite often unknown process with an open end due to being a little bit unknown at the NERSA. Quite recently regulations came out that upped the cap to 100 megawatt, and there's very few farmers, or probably probably zero of them, that would build a plant bigger than 100 megawatt at a single point for their own consumption. So essentially that removes the licensing part out of it, but the plant still needs to be registered with NERSA, as Corneels quite aptly states.
But that is just, filling out a form, getting 1 or 2 stamps and giving it to NERSA. They don't need to approve it.
They still need to register it. So I think it's a very important and often a misperception that it still needs to register. What we are currently finding, and we are working quite closely through industry with NERSA at the moment to make sure that process is in place. At the moment they are still getting that process in place. That's the latest feedback. Literally earlier this week we got in discussions with NERSA that process is still being put in place. There was an old process, but obviously with the regulations changing, new process needs to be put in place. So that's been put in place. At least our estimates is that it would take a month or 2 to get the registration through. Now, the second part to it, and that's really where the regulations also state that you need to get approval from your provider of electricity. Now, that's Eskom or municipality, whoever you buy your electricity from. And you need to then get approval from them to connect the system. Now, that process can take quite a while. What we are seeing in practice with Eskom, typically between 6 and 12 months, naturally doing a lot of work with Eskom to try and shorten that. But there is some work that needs to happen on their end, and Eskom would still require a registration with NERSA to also be in place. So that it's still an interesting landscape. That regulations are opening up. It's becoming more positive, but absolutely want to urge everyone that's planning to do this, make sure the process is followed. Do not just install and switch on a solar system without going through that process.
What is the attitude or approach from Eskom and the municipalities toward these projects? Because it could potentially take money away from them, because the farmers would be more independent.
So the interesting thing, and that's the off-the-cuff, if you off-the-cuff attitude that you'd first have from from them. So now we're going to lose money. But as you start working with the entities, whether it's Eskom, we've had quite an interesting dealings with City Power in the past, where that was the first opinion. No, we're going to lose money. We shouldn't allow us. However, what has happened, and quite a few instances where plants has been built to allow a customer to actually construct a building. We had one instance where a big shopping complex was now built that would have been built because they couldn't provide sufficient power at that specific place. A solution was then provided that includes storage, includes batteries, storage, solar generation, and a bit of diesel generator that now enabled that client to actually build the mall, and actually in turn City Power in that instance could also now sell more power in that. So once those benefits starts running through, the guys realize that. So first off the cuff reaction is no, we shouldn't, we'll lose money. But as the guys started realizing that, starting working with you, it's like, okay, actually, you know what, this is the right thing to do. And even Andre de Ruyter from Eskom has come out and said, listen, it's the way to go.
So I think just to add to Jaco's point, I mean, we've seen, you know, with the Eskom regulations, it really does vary per region. You know, so it's important that you know the supplier that you choose, you know, has knows the requisite process of that region and is able to go through the process, and that often can shorten, you know, the timelines to a bit of a shorter period. And then, you know, in terms of the attitude, I really do believe that as part of this transition, you know, these real world case studies, you know, start to materialize, and the municipalities and the likes of Eskom are seeing the actual benefit to enabling development in their areas and enabling, you know, infrastructure to go ahead, you know, for their, you know, low-lying areas or the areas that they're involved in.
There's also another part to the question, what are the ballpark figures relating to cost? Now, I know all the solutions are bespoke solutions. I don't think there's a rule of thumb, but what are the average amounts you guys finance?
So, you know, we see solar solutions as low as 100,000 Rand, you know, typically kind of almost home office, almost residential type, but this would be for commercial customers. Then, you know, we typically see, you know, on average about 2.5 to 3 million Rand. That is a very common kind of finance number. And then, you know, a bit more few and far between is, you know, in the region of kind of 10 million. And then really very unique projects, you know, such as I mentioned earlier, is those 30 to 50 million Rand projects. So again, it's very, very dependent on, you know, your energy consumption, your consumption profile, your needs. The easiest is if you can get into, if you know, Cornelius can get in touch with us, we can potentially give him, you know, some high level indications and put him in touch maybe with a supplier that can help further.
Is that first phase financing you're talking about here?
So first phase, I would say in general is really between 100, let's say 100,000 and about 10 million. Second phase, you're starting to, you know, add up the numbers and you're starting to get over that 10 million Rand mark. I don't know, Jaco, your side, if that's an accurate reflection.
Absolutely, Carl. Okay, and
how long is a piece of string?
No, exactly that. It's bespoke, and really is that we have clients where the first phase entailed, as I mentioned, a generation with storage. So that's essentially, in most clients, it's phase 1 and 2 taken one step.
Yeah.
And that's typically a 20 million solution. So absolutely, how long is that piece of string?
So the message is, see a consultant, see the profile of the solution you need, and then the costs will you know, become clear from that calculation. There's a question around tax rebates. Are there tax rebates for farmers installing alternative solutions?
Yeah, so it's a very important point. I mean, I'm surprised it hasn't. We haven't brought it up ourselves. So the big one is Section 12B. So Section 12B is a very advantageous tax piece of legislation that's currently, you know, really being used for particularly solar PV. So what that allows is for a solar plant under 1 megawatt, which is pretty much your majority of very average consumers would be able to qualify for 100% write-off. So if we worked on a rough estimate of you know, 10 Rand per watt, you know, let's say that would be a 10 million Rand investment, that equals a 2.7 million Rand tax benefit for that entity. if they're paying corporate tax rates. So Section 12B is one of the big reasons we've seen such a good acceleration in the sector, in the adoption of alternative energy and particularly solar PV.
Yeah, so there's not only a electricity saving benefit, there are many other financial benefits as well. Another question here, what size of the system is there a sweet spot when considering size versus capacity outlay, i.e. with rand spent per megawatt, is there a critical size?
When I say critical size, again, it's so crucial to understand what the consumption profile looks like of the property. As I mentioned, phase one, if you're doing pure grid-tied system, it's important to not oversize the system. Typically try and generate the amount of power that you would be consuming midday. Midday is when we're going to be generating the most power, typically, assuming a normal sunny day without cloud cover. So that would typically be the logical phase one step. Obviously, there's things to consider in terms of connection sizes, all of that. Again, that comes in the bespoke side. But if it's a quick rule of thumb, understand what your consumption is midday. That will give you a good ballpark at least.
But if your consumption is, it differs during the day. So you're a dairy farmer, you use a lot in the morning and in the evening, but you produce the biggest amount of the electricity at midday. There's a bit of a problem there. How do you address that, and can you put electricity back into the grid and then maybe take it out later? Is that an option?
It is something that's starting to open up. So I think a couple of terms that we can maybe touch on. First of all is the banking side, what was referred to as banking, and that's essentially where that's
the banking of the electricity.
Banking of electricity, not with
Carl's banking.
But you need to bank with them to be able to fund it. So your over generation of electricity, you then be able to bank. So in other words, feed it back and get credits for that. There's quite a bit involved in registration process with the likes of Eskom to get that right. But then there's also the second part of it, what's referred to as wheeling, and wheeling is an important term to understand it. It's not banking where your transaction is not necessarily with Eskom where they would provide you with the credits, but it's actually wheeling to another site. So wheeling, whether it's to yourself or whether it's to other clients. So this is something that's really opened up quite a bit with the new regulations coming out, where wheeling is now actually mentioned and thought of. And really what we're predicting is there are going to be a lot of those solutions coming out in future. It's important still to get the processes right. So it's one thing to write the regulations. Regulations is almost the first simple step. The very important second step is to make sure that the process is in place from the Eskoms, from the Munichs, from the ERSA, to be able to get that right, and then actually to administer that, because from a technical point of view, there's a lot to happen. So all those processes are now happening, but we are certainly very excited about that, and it should be in place.
And look, I think, for me, sorry, Dawie.
No.
So from a banking perspective, I mean, that's enabled a lot of projects for our customers. So where you've got really seasonal electricity usage, like a pack house, for example, you're using electricity for 6 months of the year, it's your high energy, and those energy demands are very serious and significant. But what you're now able to do is really generate consistently throughout the year in your low season, accumulate these credits from Eskom, and then utilize those in your high season. So that gives you, makes that project that much more feasible. Which again helps from the financing perspective, particularly when we're starting to take into account that the metrics of that project.
Well, I think just to add on to that, I think the seasonality of agriculture that also plays an important role, and that will actually assist them in reducing cost as well. And the wheeling specific with the geographical distribution of farmers nowadays, the diversification where they can generate at one point, but they use it at another point. That's very important, and that will be beneficial for the growth of the industry.
But is it happening?
Well, as Jaco said, it started happening. So and we banked a couple of, or we financed a couple of banking projects. So it's slowly but surely it started happening. Yeah.
I know that wheeling has been a contentious issue, but it's good to hear that it is happening. Another question, how long does it take from making the first call before the first electricity is delivered? So how long does this process normally take?
Again? So and Nicole mentioned this and touched on it. It's important to understand there's different length of processes depending on where you are buying your power from as a start. It's Eskom or whether it's from Western Cape municipality or City Power or Ekurhuleni, it's different. So some units have got a shorter process that you can actually get that approval through much quicker and actually start with your construction, and some processes are longer. And again, it's quite often, perhaps to Dawie's point as well, from an education perspective, a lot of the municipalities are still getting to grips with this and understanding it better. So those are all things that's happening in place. But let's give it a timeline at least. Quickest we've seen is about 2 months. So first generation. Longest we've seen is 2 years. So it can take.
It probably depends on the size and the complexity
Absolutely
of the installation.
as well. Yes.
Perhaps, if I can ask that question, if you go off grid, how long is that period?
Off grid, and this is a very good question, Dawie, actually, is different because there's a part of the regulations that you essentially don't necessarily have to go through all the process of registering and complying. You still need to comply with electricity codes, with SANS and all of that, but you can essentially start much quicker. So in that instance, naturally thinking of storage batteries, sometimes that has a bit of a longer lead time from an engineering perspective. There's a little bit more work, quite a bit of more work that needs to happen, often undercited by a lot of guys, but it's important that engineering is done right. That typically, again, we've seen, and I'm talking larger systems, not call it residential size system, typically about a 3-month period.
Yeah. I know farmers are very, many of them are early adopters of new technology. I know some of the farm equipment is also very, very expensive, but the farmers see the value, the long-term value of using the latest technology. What are the adoption rates of these technologies? Do you see farmers, looking at this, in a significant, number? What is the demand?
So I'll jump in and say I think we've now started seeing the kind of uptake. Some of the interesting kind of behaviour that we can chat about is to say often solar is and particularly in the farming sector is very regional. So what will tend to happen is call it the role model farmer in the area might decide to go and explore this technology and successfully implement a project, and then we'll find 5 or 6 other farmers in the sub-region that will also go through that. So we're starting to see a lot of the bigger farming groups moving, which is a good indication that we're starting to get a bit of that critical mass from an adoption rate perspective.
Yeah, I think there's also, in the past, there was sometimes a novelty element to it. You want to be the first to use this new technology, but it didn't make financial sense. But now it starts to make financial sense to look at these options. There is a question, let me just find it. And I think we've covered most of it. Fred asks, with solar generation, you can typically generate sufficient electricity for daytime needs, i.e. an estimate of 45 megawatts, but would need to supplement it for after dark use. In windy areas, would you recommend that wind generation is used or a storage solution, i.e. batteries, which is typically the most cost effective?
If it's a windy area with a wind resource, probably a combination of solar, wind, and storage. It's still solar is often quite a little bit more predictable than wind. But if you combine solar, wind, and storage, absolutely can. Again, have a look at the resource. Make sure the right simulations are run for that area.
Yeah. Another question is, It's a typical farmer question. How stealable are these solutions?
It's very popular though. Look, it's I suppose as with anything else, you need to, you're not going to put it out in an open field and leave it
Forget
be.
about it. Yeah.
It is a commodity. Yeah. I suppose with anything, as I guess a bakkie is also a very stealable commodity. So as you secure anything else, you need to make sure you secure your modules as well.
But you can insure it.
You
Sorry.
can,
You can
insure it. I mean, to Dawie's point, and the other thing is, I mean, there's now technology. You know, the mounting brackets. You know, and Jaco will know very well, is really starting to adapt to become, you know, preventative. You know, so you know, a little bit of that make a plan, you know, is really happening in South Africa. So we are addressing that. But yeah, insurance is obviously one of the key ways that you can address that risk.
And maybe put it on top of a roof as opposed to
Yes.
on the ground. Let me just see what else I have here. There's a question regarding maintenance. How much maintenance is required and what does it cost?
So typically, maintenance is actually very important. Sorry, sorry. Quite often the maintenance is underestimated. You still need to keep these modules clean. They need to be washed. Need to inspect, but also very important. As part of your solution, you get an online monitoring system. So you constantly have guys that, and typically your provider should have that in place, have a team that are monitoring these plants for you. Again, you're an expert at farming, not solar. Let the guys that are experts at solar help you with that, help you with the maintenance. And there are teams in place that constantly monitor that. If something goes wrong within 5 minutes, they'll know that there's something wrong with your plant or something that's out of whack, and they'd be able to react. But typically what we recommend, and this is absolutely dependent on the area, is cleaning schedules. Obviously, if you clean it more, you optimize your efficiency, but typically between 2 and 6 times a year that you need to just clean the modules. But
2 and 6 times, so it's not
2 to 6 times, yes.
and it's just, you put water on it and
Put
you wash
water,
it,
yeah.
and it's a simple
Absolutely.
process.
No soap, nothing. It's a water.
Squeegee.
How do you foresee the rollout of solar solutions in South Africa? You know, obviously it's in its maybe slightly ahead of infancy, but in 10 years' time, how prevalent will these solutions be on the farms using a lot of electricity in the country?
All right, I think if I look at the current trends, we will definitely see exponential growth in alternative energy solutions over the next couple of years. First of all, from a cost perspective, you know, as the technology improves, the cost come down, but also, you know, from a reliability point of view, it will definitely increase exponentially over time. And I think, you know, as farmers become more educated and adopt the processes more, we will definitely see that over time.
So maybe just a short little note to add to that, what we'll see, and perhaps just an interesting little stat, that every hour, the amount of solar that reaches the planet is enough. There's enough energy in that to power the planet for a full year. So within an hour, we can power a full year's energy supply for the planet. So just let that ponder a little bit.
Yeah, I believe if you have solar panels put on the size of a land which is the size of the Free State, you can actually supply the whole world with energy. So
Absolutely.
there's a lot of potential. Let me just see. Question regarding the costs of the equipment. Is it still becoming cheaper year after year? If you wait maybe a year, would it be a lot cheaper next year?
This is a very interesting and extremely topical at this stage within the industry. I suppose economics 101 has taken over, and as production increased over the last 10 years, naturally the prices has come down. So that's obviously the standard perception. Unfortunately, what we've seen in the last 12 months is that from a solar module perspective, as for instance, the pricing has increased by 30% on them. So I wouldn't advise to wait, because every day you wait, you could have already saved that power, and it's not a sales talk. It really is economic factor on that. So pricing started essentially stabilized, and the worldwide demand of this is massive. And there's a lot of drivers, from water shortages in China that's actually affecting production, predominantly production of these are taking place in China. The top producers are based there. India, as for instance, in 1st of April is actually bringing import tax on solar modules, which in turn is also influencing solar module pricing out of the rest of the world quite substantially. So definitely don't wait. That's the short of it.
But I think, plus the exchange rate, we're not sure which direction that will go. So I think that's another one to add.
Yeah, and then Section 12B, to that tax conversation we had earlier. I mean, we can't foresee what is going to happen from a tax perspective. We know what the current landscape is. So that's another risk factor of kind of waiting. So in our view, it shouldn't be. You should be at least really looking at your first phase.
Yeah.
And it is, from a financial point of view, it's already a no-brainer. It's not a, it's just, it really is, it's a no-brainer, and the technology is proven. It's not a case, we're not sure about the tech. The tech works, financially it works.
Can you please give us a real-life example of how much money has been saved by a certain farmer? Is there any indication, a rule of thumb regarding the savings?
Look, there's putting it into a return percentage. Carl mentioned the payback period earlier, but typically what we are seeing, and we often put out a number in the form of a first-year return to a client, and typically that return we are seeing between a 20 to 30%. So essentially, if you're investing $1 million now, already you're going to get 200,000 back in saving on the first year, 200 to 300,000 rand back that first year, excluding the tax benefit that Carl has mentioned.
That is significant. Gent, I think I've put all the questions I've received to you. Maybe just give us a last word on what you think is very pertinent for people watching this to take home and to remember and to use when they consider such solutions. Dawie, let's start with you.
Right, I think it's not a question of why, but when I will invest in alternative energy. We spoke about the cost and the reliability of electricity supply. I think the need is there to do it. Now is the time to do it. So make your assumptions. Yeah, so do it. Get the specialists in. They are available. Get them in. You use, as a farming business, you use specialists in any other part of your business. Do that for your electricity supply and your solar as well. The benefits are there. Just go in.
Jaco?
Because other than what Dawie said, just agreeing with that, is interesting stat, and we're talking the softer issues here is. Just out of interest, we did the calc the other day, just in terms of the power generated, at least with plants that we've got control over. There's a lot other plants out there as well. And calculating that back to how much coal needed to be burned in coal plants in South Africa. And that number for the last year was 50,000 tons of coal. Now, just think of that, again, rough numbers, it's about 1,400 less coal trucks on the road, and I don't know if we've got any farmers from Mpumalanga, they would probably tell you, and they would tell you, and I've stayed there for quite a while, that it's a big impact on the roads, and you see that. So just I thought I'll leave a little soft issue.
So there's a saving component on the maintenance of your vehicles as well.
Absolutely.
And
stone chips.
And frustration as well.
Frustration.
Go.
Yeah, so I think for me is just touching, I think, on Davie's earlier point of really planning. So, I think, in planning, energy, needs to be the same as crop planning or any other planning you're doing in your business. Energy is now, one of those fundamentals that cannot be overlooked. So start that journey early, get the right specialist in, to Davie's point, and really contact the bank, for help. We are there to be your trusted advisor. and it's one of the FNB areas that we can play a really big role to help you as a customer in procuring these assets and having this energy conversation with you.
Yeah, the message I get is, listen, it makes financial sense. Pick up the phone and just start the process. And it is a relatively complicated process and bespoke. Solutions will be developed for your operation, but just start the process. It may be worthwhile. Gents, thank you so much for your time today. Dawie, Jaco, Kyle.
Thank you.
And a link to this webinar, to the recording thereof, will be sent to everyone. And I think, share it with your other farmers and colleagues. And I think it is really valuable to see what the benefits are of renewable solutions, and hopefully the farming industry in South Africa can become even greener than it currently is. Thanks for joining us.